The wilted wildflower trembled in her fingers as Katherine Torres stood alone beside the burned remains of what had once been her family's homestead. Her cotton dress stained with ash, and her dark hair falling loose from its pins as she stared at nothing in particular, unaware that a man on horseback was watching her from the ridge above. Benjamin Vance had been riding for 3 days straight through the Arizona Territory, heading north from Oro Blanco with a string of horses he planned to sell in Tucson. The August heat of 1878 beat down mercilessly on the desert landscape, making the air shimmer and dance above the scrubland. He had stopped to water his horses at a creek when he spotted the smoke earlier that morning, and something had pulled him toward it despite his better judgment telling him to mind his own business. Now, as he sat astride his buckskin gelding and looked down at the young woman standing amid the destruction, he felt his chest tighten with an emotion he could not quite name. Katherine heard the horses before she saw them. She turned slowly, her green eyes dull with shock, and watched as the rider approached. She should have been frightened, standing there alone with no protection, but fear seemed like a luxury she could no longer afford. The flower in her hand had been growing beside her mother's grave, the only living thing left in the wake of the Apache raid that had taken everything from her 2 days prior. She had been in town visiting the doctor when it happened, returning to find her parents and younger brother dead, her home reduced to blackened timber and ash. Benjamin dismounted carefully, removing his hat as he approached. He was a tall man of 26 years, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that needed cutting. His face was weathered beyond his years from a life spent outdoors, but his blue eyes held genuine concern as he took in the scene before him. "Miss," he said softly, keeping his distance so as not to startle her. "Are you hurt?" Katherine looked down at herself as if surprised to find her body still intact. "No," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "I was not here when they came." Benjamin's jaw tightened as he surveyed the ruins. He had seen such destruction before, too many times in his years working cattle drives and living on the frontier. The conflict between settlers and the Apache had been brutal and unforgiving on both sides, fed by broken treaties and desperate circumstances. He knew the raids often came from hunger and displacement as much as from anger, but that knowledge did nothing to ease the suffering they caused. "Do you have family elsewhere? Someone I can take you to?" She shook her head slowly. "There is no one. My parents came west from Missouri after the war. It was just us." Her fingers tightened around the flower stem, and Benjamin watched as a petal fell to the scorched earth. "What is that you are holding?" he asked, more to keep her talking than out of genuine curiosity. He had learned long ago that shock could be as dangerous as any physical wound. Katherine looked at the wilted flower as if seeing it for the first time. "A columbine. My mother loved them. She tried so hard to grow a garden here, but the soil was too dry, the sun too harsh. This one bloomed beside her grave, and now it is dying too." Her voice broke on the last word, and she swayed on her feet. Benjamin moved quickly, catching her elbow as her knees buckled. "Easy now. When did you last eat or drink anything?" "I do not remember," she admitted, leaning against him despite herself. The world had taken on a strange, distant quality, as if she were watching everything happen to someone else. He guided her to a patch of shade beneath a scraggly mesquite tree and retrieved his canteen from his saddle. Katherine drank gratefully, the water clearing some of the fog from her mind. As her vision focused, she really looked at the man who had stopped to help her. He had kind eyes, she noticed, and capable hands that had seen hard work. There was something solid about him, something that made her feel slightly less adrift in a world that had suddenly become unrecognizable. "I am Benjamin Vance," he said, settling onto his heels beside her. I run a small ranch about 10 miles south of here, near Oro Blanco. It is not much, but the land has good water and shelter." Katherine understood what he was offering, and pride warred with desperate practicality in her chest. "I cannot impose on a stranger," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "You would not be imposing. I could use help with the place, truth be told. I have been trying to get crops planted, expand beyond just horses and cattle, but I do not have the knowledge for it. If you stayed on, you could work for room and board until you figure out what you want to do next." He paused, then added carefully, "There is a small bunkhouse on the property where my ranch hand used to live before he moved on. You would have privacy and safety." She looked at him searchingly, trying to gauge his intentions. What she saw in his face was simple decency, something she had begun to fear no longer existed in this harsh land. "Why would you help me? You do not know me." Benjamin was quiet for a moment, turning his hat in his hands. 3 years ago, my younger sister was killed in a raid on our family's farm in Texas. I was not there to protect her. I have been asking myself ever since what I could have done differently, what I should have done. I cannot change what happened then, but I can help now when I see someone in need. That is reason enough. The honesty in his words touched something deep in Katherine's grief-stricken heart. She looked down at the wilted columbine in her hand, at the delicate petals that were browning at the edges despite her careful handling. "I do not want to be a burden. Then do not be one. Come work for me, earn your keep. When you are ready, if you want to move on, I will not stop you. But for now, you need a place to go, and I am offering one." He stood and extended his hand to her. "What do you say, Miss Torres?" She stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment, then slowly reached out and took it. His grip was warm and steady as he helped her to her feet. "I say yes, and thank you, Mr. Vance." "Benjamin," he corrected gently. "If we are going to be working together, we might as well use given names." "Katherine," she replied, "though most people call me Kate." He smiled for the first time, and she noticed how it softened the hard lines of his face. "Kate it is, then. We should gather anything you want to keep from here, and then we will head to the ranch. The day is getting away from us." There was precious little to salvage from the ruins. Katherine found her mother's small jewelry box, miraculously intact though scorched on one side, containing a silver locket and her grandmother's wedding ring. She found her father's pocket watch in the ashes of what had been his bedroom, the glass cracked, but the mechanism still ticking stubbornly on. She wrapped these treasures carefully in a charred bit of cloth and tucked them into her dress pocket. Benjamin had been standing a respectful distance away, and when she returned to him, he saw that she still carried the wilted flower. Without a word, he took off his bandana and dampened it with water from his canteen, then carefully wrapped it around the flower's stem. "It might perk up a bit with some moisture," he said. "Even if it does not make it, we can save the seeds for planting later." The gesture was such a small kindness, but it broke through the numbness that had been holding Katherine together. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she accepted the wrapped flower, and she turned away, embarrassed by her weakness. Benjamin simply waited, saying nothing, giving her the space to grieve without making her feel ashamed of it. When she had composed herself, they mounted up. Benjamin lifted her easily onto his buckskin, then swung up behind her. Having her own horse would have been more proper, but all of Katherine's family's livestock had been taken in the raid, and Benjamin's string of horses were half wild and unsuitable for a rider in her condition. She sat stiffly at first, acutely aware of his presence behind her, but as they rode, exhaustion overtook propriety, and she found herself leaning back against his solid warmth. The journey to Benjamin's ranch took most of the afternoon. They rode through desert landscape dotted with saguaro and prickly pear, through dry washes that would run wild with water during the monsoon storms, past rocky outcroppings that shimmered in the heat. Benjamin pointed out landmarks along the way, telling her about the land in a low, steady voice that required no response. Katherine listened with half an ear, the other half of her attention focused on staying conscious and upright. The Vance ranch, when they finally reached it, was modest but well-maintained. The main house was adobe with a wooden porch, small but sturdy. A barn stood nearby, along with a corral and the promised bunkhouse. Katherine could see where Benjamin had started to clear land for planting. The earth turned, but nothing yet growing in it. There was a well with a good stone housing, and cottonwood trees grew along what must be a creek bed. "It is not fancy," Benjamin said as he helped her down from the horse. "But it is home." Katherine looked around, taking in the simple orderliness of the place. "It is beautiful," she said honestly. After the destruction she had just left behind, anything whole and standing seemed like a miracle. He showed her to the bunkhouse, which was indeed small but clean. It had a narrow bed, a table with a chair, a trunk for storing belongings, and pegs on the wall for hanging clothes. A small window looked out toward the main house and the mountains beyond. "I will bring you some blankets and supplies," Benjamin said. "There is a washstand outside, and you are welcome to use the pump at the well anytime. I will make supper in about an hour if you are hungry." Left alone, Katherine sank onto the bed and finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of her loss. She curled onto her side, clutching the wrapped flower to her chest, and wept until she had no tears left. When she finally sat up, the light outside had shifted toward evening, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. She washed her face at the washstand Benjamin had mentioned, plaited her hair into a single braid, and tried to make herself presentable. The smell of cooking meat drew her to the main house. She knocked hesitantly on the door frame, and Benjamin called for her to come in. The interior of the house was as neat as the exterior, with simple furniture and few personal touches. Benjamin was standing at a cast iron stove, tending a pan of salt pork and beans. The table was set for two. "I hope you do not mind plain fare," he said. "I am not much of a cook, but I can manage the basics." "It smells wonderful," Katherine said, and realized she meant it. She could not remember the last time she had eaten anything, and her stomach cramped with sudden hunger. They ate in companionable silence at first. Katherine tried to mind her manners, but she was ravenous, and Benjamin seemed more pleased than offended by her appetite. He cut her generous slices of bread from a somewhat lopsided loaf he admitted to having baked himself, and she spread it with butter and ate until the hollow ache in her belly finally subsided. "Thank you," she said when she could eat no more. "For the meal, for everything." Benjamin nodded, pushing his empty plate away. "You are welcome. I thought tomorrow, if you are feeling up to it, you could show me what you know about gardening. I have been trying to get things growing for months now with little success. I have the land turned, but I do not know what will actually take in this soil or when to plant what. If you have knowledge of such things, I would be grateful for the help." Katherine thought of her mother's struggles with the Arizona soil, of the countless plants that had withered and died despite her best efforts. "I watched my mother try for 2 years," she said carefully. "She had some success with certain plants, though nothing like the garden she had in Missouri. I can share what I know, but I cannot promise miracles. Whatever you can teach me will be more than I know now," Benjamin assured her. "I know horses and cattle, but plants are a mystery to me." They talked as the evening deepened into night, cautious conversation at first that slowly became more natural. Benjamin told her about growing up in Texas, about learning the ranch trade from his father before the war, about drifting west after his sister's death, because he could not stand to stay in a place with so many painful memories. Katherine spoke haltingly about her family, about her father's dreams of making a new life in the territory, about her mother's quiet strength and her brother's laughter that she would never hear again. When exhaustion finally drove Katherine back to the bunkhouse, Benjamin walked her across the yard despite her protests that she could manage the short distance alone. "Tomorrow is another day," he said at her door. "You do not have to figure everything out tonight. Just rest." But rest was hard to come by. Katherine lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the night sounds of the desert. A coyote howled somewhere in the distance, and owls called to each other in the darkness. She thought about the wilted flower she had placed in a cup of water on the table, about her mother's dreams of a garden, about this strange man who had appeared when she needed help most. She wondered if she had made a terrible mistake trusting a stranger, but something in her heart told her that Benjamin Vance was exactly who he appeared to be. A decent man trying to do right in a hard world. She must have eventually slept, because she woke to the sound of a rooster crowing and weak morning light filtering through the window. For a blessed moment, she did not remember what had happened, but then reality came crashing back, and she had to press her hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. The grief was still there, as crushing as it had been yesterday, but alongside it now was something else. The stubborn need to survive, to honor her family's memory by continuing to live. Katherine rose and dressed in the same stained dress she had been wearing, making a mental note that she would need to figure out the matter of clothing soon. She splashed water on her face and tidied her braid, then went to check on the flower. To her surprise, it had perked up slightly in the water, the petals looking less wilted than they had the night before. It was still far from healthy, but there was life in it yet. She took this as a good omen. Benjamin was already up and working when she emerged from the bunkhouse. She found him in the corral, working with a young horse on a lead line. He moved with easy confidence, his voice low and soothing as he encouraged the skittish animal to accept his touch. Katherine leaned against the fence and watched, impressed by his patience and skill. He noticed her after a few minutes and led the horse over. "Morning. There is coffee in the house if you want some, and I left out bread and preserves for breakfast. Thank you. Would you like me to bring you something? I ate already, but coffee would not go amiss." He smiled at her, and Katherine found herself almost smiling back. She fetched 2 cups of the strong, bitter coffee and brought them out to the corral. They sat on the fence together, drinking and watching the horses in the morning light. The air was still cool, but Katherine could already feel the promise of heat in the sun. "Tell me about your mother's garden," Benjamin said. "What did she try to grow? What worked and what did not?" Katherine thought back, calling up memories that were bittersweet now. She learned quickly that most of what grew in Missouri would not survive here. The soil is too dry, and there is not enough rain. But she found that certain things adapted if you gave them enough water and protection from the worst of the sun. Squash did well, and beans. She had success with corn if she planted it deep and watered it regularly. Tomatoes struggled but would produce if tended carefully. She paused, remembering. What she wanted most was flowers, though. She tried so hard to grow flowers. Did any survive? A few. Wild varieties adapted to the desert seemed to do best. The columbines grew near the creek where there was more moisture. She had some success with desert marigolds and brittlebush, things native to the area. But she dreamed of roses and peonies like she had back home, and those never took. Benjamin was quiet for a moment, then said, "Show me what you think might work here. We have good water from the creek, and I am willing to put in the work. Even if we start small, it would be something." They spent the morning surveying his cleared land and planning. Katherine walked the property with him, checking the soil and drainage, noting where the sun hit hardest and where there was natural shade. Her knowledge surprised her. She had not realized how much she had absorbed from watching her mother all those years. Benjamin listened to everything she said, asking intelligent questions and taking her suggestions seriously. By midday, they had a plan. They would start with practical crops: squash, beans, corn, things that would provide food. But they would also dedicate a small plot near the house to flowers, to beauty for its own sake. Benjamin would ride to Oro Blanco the next day to buy seeds and supplies. "You should come with me," he said as they walked back to the house for lunch. "You will need proper clothes, supplies of your own. I can advance you some pay." Katherine felt her cheeks heat with embarrassment. "I have no money to repay you. You will earn it working here. Consider it an investment in my ranch. Besides," he added more gently, "you cannot keep wearing that dress. It is not practical for the work we will be doing." She knew he was right, but accepting his charity chafed against her pride. Still, pride was a luxury she could not afford. "I will repay every penny," she said firmly. "I have no doubt you will," Benjamin replied, and there was respect in his voice that made Katherine stand a little taller. They rode to Oro Blanco the following morning. The small mining town was rough and dusty, with a main street lined with supply stores, saloons, and a few hotels. Katherine felt self-conscious in her stained dress as they walked down the boardwalk, but Benjamin stayed close beside her, his presence a quiet reassurance. They went first to the general store, where Katherine selected 2 practical cotton dresses, a pair of work boots, and various necessities. Benjamin paid without comment, then bought seeds and gardening tools while Katherine looked on. The storekeeper, a talkative man named Horace Middleton, eyed Katherine with obvious curiosity. "New to the area?" he asked. "Miss Torres will be working at my ranch," Benjamin said before Katherine could respond. His tone was polite but firm, closing off further questions. Still, Katherine could feel eyes on her as they completed their errands, could hear the whispers that followed them. A young woman living on a bachelor's ranch was the stuff of gossip, regardless of the circumstances. She lifted her chin and ignored the stares, refusing to be ashamed of doing what she needed to survive. They had lunch at a small restaurant, where Katherine ate roasted chicken and vegetables that someone else had cooked. The normality of it, of sitting in a public place and eating a meal, felt strange after the trauma of the past days. Benjamin kept up a steady stream of conversation about innocuous topics, seeming to understand that she needed the distraction. On the ride back to the ranch, with supplies loaded and Katherine wearing one of her new dresses, she felt something shift inside her. The grief was still there, would likely always be there, but it no longer threatened to drown her completely. She had a purpose now, a place to be and work to do. It was enough to build on. They started planting the next day. Benjamin proved to be a quick study and a tireless worker, following Katherine's instructions without complaint even when the work was backbreaking. They dug irrigation channels from the creek, hauled water in buckets when needed, and planted seeds with careful precision. Katherine showed him how to make the soil more hospitable by mixing in compost from the barn, how to protect young plants from the harsh sun with makeshift shade covers, how to space crops for maximum yield. Working side by side in the sun, they fell into an easy partnership. Benjamin would often start singing old work songs as they labored, his voice pleasant if untrained, and Katherine found herself joining in sometimes. They talked about everything and nothing as they worked, the merits of different horse breeds, favorite foods, books they had read, places they had been. Katherine learned that Benjamin had a dry sense of humor that would catch her off guard and make her laugh despite herself. Benjamin discovered that Katherine had a sharp mind and a stubborn determination that matched his own. The seeds they had planted began to sprout after 2 weeks, tiny green shoots pushing up through the dark soil. Katherine checked them obsessively, watering and tending them with a devotion that bordered on religious. When Benjamin teased her about it gently, she flushed, but did not stop. These small signs of life felt monumentally important, proof that good things could still grow even in harsh soil. The flower plot was her special project. She planted the seeds they had saved from her mother's columbine, along with native wildflower varieties they had gathered from the surrounding desert. She was not sure any of it would take, but she tended the plot with extra care, whispering encouragement to the invisible seeds beneath the soil as her mother had once done. As spring turned toward summer, the garden began to truly flourish. The vegetables grew with encouraging vigor, and one morning Katherine discovered tiny columbine shoots emerging in the flower bed. She called Benjamin over to see, her excitement making her forget her usual reserve, and he grinned at her enthusiasm with genuine pleasure. "You did it," he said. "Your mother would be proud." The words made Katherine's eyes sting with tears, but they were not entirely sad tears. "We did it," she corrected. "This garden belongs to both of us." Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition that they had become a team, partners in more than just the work. Benjamin held her gaze for a long moment, and Katherine felt her heart beat faster in a way that had nothing to do with exertion from working in the sun. They had been carefully proper with each other in the weeks Katherine had been at the ranch. She slept in the bunkhouse, took her meals in the main house, and maintained appropriate distance at all times. Benjamin never gave her reason to feel unsafe or uncomfortable, always treating her with respect and consideration. But lately, Katherine had begun to notice things. The way his eyes would linger on her when he thought she was not looking, the care he took in small gestures like saving her the best pieces of meat at dinner, or repairing the chair in her bunkhouse without being asked. She noticed, too, her own growing awareness of him, how her pulse would quicken when he stood close, how she looked forward to their evenings talking on the porch after the work was done. She told herself it was too soon, that her grief was still too fresh to entertain such thoughts. But the heart, she was learning, followed its own timeline. One evening in early June, a thunderstorm rolled in from the mountains, the first real rain they had seen in weeks. Katherine and Benjamin rushed to secure the animals and protect the garden as much as possible, working together in the increasing wind and the first fat drops of rain. By the time they finished, they were both soaked through and laughing breathlessly at the absurdity of running around in the weather. They stood on the porch of the main house, watching the rain pour down, and Katherine felt suddenly, gloriously alive. The water was already running off the roof in streams, pooling in the yard and feeding the thirsty earth. The garden would drink deep tonight, and everything they had planted would benefit from this natural blessing. "Thank you," Katherine said impulsively, turning to Benjamin. Water dripped from his hair and ran down his face, but he had never looked more handsome to her. "Thank you for stopping that day. Thank you for giving me a place to land when I had nowhere else to go. Thank you for treating me with kindness when you could have just ridden on by." Benjamin looked at her with such intensity that Katherine felt breathless. "Kate," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her shiver despite the warm rain. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out before you say anything." She nodded, not trusting her voice. "I did not plan on this," he began, choosing his words carefully. "When I stopped to help you that day, I thought I would take you to town, see you settled somewhere safe, and move on with my life. But then I got to know you, got to see your strength and your determination. your kindness even in the midst of grief. I have come to care for you, Kate, more than I should, probably, given the circumstances. I know it has not been long, and I know you are still grieving your family, and I will understand completely if you do not feel the same way, but I could not keep quiet about it any longer. You deserve to know. Catherine's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. Benjamin, she said softly, and watched his expression turn cautious, bracing for rejection. She stepped closer to him, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body despite their wet clothes. I care for you too. I have been trying not to, telling myself it was too soon, that I was just confused and grateful and not thinking clearly. But it is more than that. You have given me more than shelter and work. You have given me hope again. You have helped me see that life can still be good even after terrible loss. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle despite his calloused palm. Are you sure? He asked. I do not want you to feel obligated because I have helped you. This has to be real, Kate. I need it to be real. It is real, she assured him, leaning into his touch. I have never been more sure of anything. Benjamin kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. Catherine's arms came up around his neck, and she kissed him back with all the emotion she had been trying to deny for weeks. The rain poured down around them, soaking them to the skin, but neither of them noticed or cared. They stood wrapped in each other's arms on the porch, kissing like the world might end tomorrow, and this was their last chance at happiness. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and smiling, Benjamin pressed his forehead to hers. I want to do this right, he said. I want to court you proper, give you time to be sure. We have the rest of our lives to figure this out. Katherine laughed, giddy with joy and relief. You are courting me while I am living in your bunkhouse and working on your ranch. I think we may have done this backward. Then we will do the rest of it forward, he said, grinning. Starting with this, Miss Katherine Torres, may I have permission to call on you with romantic intentions? Yes, Mr. Benjamin Vance, she replied, matching his formal tone with dancing eyes. You may absolutely call on me, though the walk from the main house to the bunkhouse is not very far for proper calling. They both laughed at the absurdity of trying to impose formal courtship rules on their unusual situation, but they did their best over the following weeks. Benjamin would knock on the bunkhouse door in the evenings and escort Katherine to the main house for dinner as if she were a proper lady, and he a gentleman caller. They would sit on the porch afterward, talking and occasionally stealing kisses when the evening shadows grew long enough to provide a sense of privacy. On Sundays, Benjamin would hitch up his wagon and take Katherine to church in Oro Blanco, enduring the gossip and curious stares with his head held high, and Katherine's hand firmly tucked into the crook of his arm. The garden continued to thrive as summer progressed. The vegetables came in bountifully, providing fresh food for their table and extra to sell in town. The flower plot became a riot of color as the native plants bloomed and the columbines grew tall and strong, their delicate blossoms nodding in the breeze. Katherine would often stand in the garden in the early morning, watching the sun rise over the mountains and feeling her mother's presence in the beauty around her. One morning in late July, Benjamin found her there, tears streaming down her face as she looked at the columbines. He went to her immediately, concerned that something was wrong. Kate, what is it? Are you hurt? She shook her head, smiling through her tears. No, I am not hurt. These are good tears, I promise. It is just that the columbines have bloomed, Benjamin. The seeds from the wilted flower I was holding the day you found me have grown into this. My mother's flowers are here, alive and blooming. It feels like a gift from her, like she is telling me it is all right to be happy again. Benjamin wrapped his arms around her from behind, holding her as she cried and laughed at the same time. "She would want you to be happy," he murmured against her hair. "Any mother would want that for her daughter." They stood together in the garden as the sun climbed higher, and Katherine felt something settle into place inside her heart. She would always miss her family, would always carry the grief of losing them. But she had found something here with Benjamin, something worth nurturing and protecting. Love, she realized, was like the garden they had planted together. It needed care and attention, water and sunlight, patience and faith that growth would come even when you could not see it happening beneath the surface. In August, Benjamin formally asked Katherine to marry him. He did it in the garden, naturally, on a warm evening when the air smelled of earth and growing things. He got down on one knee amid the flourishing vegetables and blooming flowers and pulled out a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. "Kate, you have brought life back to this ranch and to my heart. I cannot imagine my days without you in them. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Katherine did not hesitate. "Yes," she said, pulling him to his feet so she could kiss him properly. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married in September in the small church in Oro Blanco, with half the town attending out of either genuine goodwill or shameless curiosity. Katherine wore a new dress that Benjamin had insisted on buying her, pale blue cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs, and carried a bouquet of columbines from their garden. Benjamin wore his best suit, his hair neatly trimmed for the occasion, and looked at his bride like she hung the moon and stars. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Benjamin kissed Katherine with such tenderness that several of the ladies in attendance dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. Afterward, there was a modest reception at the town hall, with food and dancing and well wishes from neighbors who had come to accept the unusual couple. As the evening wore on and the dancing continued, Benjamin led Katherine outside for a moment of quiet. They stood under the stars, wrapped in each other's arms, and marveled at how much had changed in just a few short months. "I found you holding a wilted flower," Benjamin said softly, echoing the thought that had been in both their minds. "And now look at us. Married, with a garden that blooms like something out of a dream." "You planted that garden," Katherine reminded him. "You took a broken woman standing in ashes and gave her hope again. You gave me a future when I thought I had none." "We built it together," Benjamin corrected, tilting her chin up so he could look into her eyes. "Everything we have, we made together. That is how it will always be, Kate, partners in all things." They returned to the ranch that night as husband and wife. Katherine moved her few belongings from the bunkhouse to the main house, taking her place beside Benjamin in the home they would share. The transition felt natural, right, as if this was how things had always been meant to be. Their first year of marriage was full of learning and adjustment, but also deep happiness. They worked the ranch together, expanded the garden, and began planning for the future. Benjamin taught Katherine to ride and shoot, practical skills for a ranch wife on the frontier. Katherine taught Benjamin the finer points of gardening and cooking, improving their meals considerably to his great delight. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, figured out how to fight fair and make up sweet, discovered that they were even better partners in marriage than they had been before. The garden became Katherine's pride and joy. It expanded each year, producing not just food but breathtaking beauty. The columbines multiplied and spread, their delicate flowers becoming a symbol of hope and renewal. Katherine began saving seeds from the best plants, selecting and improving them year after year. Neighbors started coming to trade for her vegetables and to admire the flowers, and eventually Katherine began selling both produce and flowers at the market in Oro Blanco. Benjamin's horse business thrived as well. His reputation for training quality animals spread throughout the territory, and he began getting requests from as far away as New Mexico and California. The ranch prospered, allowing them to make improvements and expand their holdings. They built a larger barn, added more corrals, and even constructed a small greenhouse where Katherine could start seeds and protect tender plants from the harsh desert climate. In the spring of 1880, Katherine discovered she was pregnant. She broke the news to Benjamin one evening in the garden, where they still spent their happiest moments together. He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests that he would make her dizzy. "We are going to have a baby," he kept repeating, wonder in his voice. "Kate, we are going to be parents." "We are," she confirmed, glowing with joy. In late October, the doctor thinks. Benjamin became even more protective than usual during Katherine's pregnancy, constantly worried that she was working too hard or lifting too much. Katherine bore his fussing with patient amusement, knowing it came from love even when it became overbearing. She continued to tend the garden as long as she was able, finding peace in the familiar work and the beauty growing all around her. Their son was born on a crisp October morning, arriving with lusty cries that announced his displeasure at being thrust into the world. They named him Samuel, after Benjamin's father, and both parents fell completely in love with him from the first moment. Benjamin held his son with trembling hands, tears streaming down his face as he looked at the tiny, perfect miracle they had created together. "He is beautiful," Benjamin whispered, unable to take his eyes off the baby. "Kate, he is perfect." Katherine, exhausted but radiant, smiled at the sight of her husband cradling their child. "He has your eyes," she said. "Or he will when they change from baby blue to proper blue." Those early months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Samuel was a demanding baby who seemed to need constant attention, but neither parent minded. Benjamin would walk the floor with him at night when he was fussy, singing the same work songs he had once sung while gardening, and Katherine would watch from the bed with her heart so full she thought it might burst. The garden had to be somewhat neglected that first winter with a newborn, but Benjamin did his best to maintain it in Katherine's absence. When spring came and Katherine was able to get back outside, she found that Benjamin had done a remarkable job keeping everything going. The columbines came back as strong as ever, and she spent happy hours working in the garden with Samuel in a basket beside her, talking to him as she had once talked to the plants, telling him about his grandmother and the flowers she had loved. Samuel grew into a bright, curious toddler with his father's easy smile and his mother's determination. He learned to walk in the garden paths, taking his first wobbly steps between the vegetable rows while both parents watched with anxious pride. He learned his colors from the flowers and his numbers counting tomatoes on the vine. The garden that had begun as a symbol of hope became the backdrop for a happy childhood. In 1882, Katherine gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose for the climbing roses that had finally, after years of careful tending, begun to bloom against the south wall of the house. Rose was an easier baby than Samuel had been, content to observe the world with serious dark eyes that reminded Katherine of her own mother. Samuel, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his little sister and wanted to help with everything, which was both endearing and occasionally challenging. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. The ranch continued to prosper, and Benjamin's reputation as a horseman grew throughout the territory. Katherine's garden became famous in its own right, with people traveling from distant towns just to see the flowers that bloomed in seemingly impossible profusion in the harsh Arizona desert. She developed new varieties through careful selection and crossbreeding, creating columbines that were hardier and more vibrant than any that had existed before. In 1886, when Samuel was 6 and Rose was 4, the family took their first real trip together, traveling to Tucson for the territorial fair. Katherine entered her flowers in the competition and won first prize, a blue ribbon and $20 that made her flush with pride. Benjamin entered a young mare he had trained and took second place in the working horse category. They celebrated that night at a hotel restaurant, letting the children order whatever they wanted and feeling wealthy and successful and impossibly blessed. On the trip home, with the children asleep in the back of the wagon and the stars wheeling overhead, Katherine leaned against Benjamin's shoulder and reflected on how far they had come from that terrible day when he had found her standing in ashes, holding a wilted flower. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had not stopped that day?" she asked quietly. Benjamin was quiet for a moment, guiding the horses around a rut in the road. "I think about it sometimes," he admitted. "But then I try not to, because the thought of a world where I did not meet you is too empty to contemplate." "I would not have survived," Katherine said with certainty. "I was giving up when you found me. I had nothing left to live for and no will to keep going. You saved my life, Benjamin." "No," he corrected gently. "We saved each other. I was just existing before you came into my life, going through the motions but not really living. You taught me how to grow things, Kate, not just plants but hope and joy and love. You taught me that beautiful things can bloom even in the hardest soil if you care for them properly." She turned her head to kiss his shoulder, unable to reach his cheek from her current position. "We have built a good life together. We have built a great life together," he amended. "And it just keeps getting better." More children followed in the years to come. In 1888, twin boys arrived, keeping Katherine and Benjamin exhausted but laughing. They named them Thomas and James, and Samuel and Rose took their roles as older siblings seriously, helping to watch the babies and feeling very grown up and important. In 1891, another daughter was born, Margaret, who would prove to be the wildest of all their children, forever climbing things she should not and leading her siblings on adventures that turned their parents' hair gray. Through it all, the garden remained the heart of their home. It continued to expand and evolve, growing more beautiful and productive with each passing year. The columbines that had started from the seeds of a single wilted flower now covered an entire hillside behind the house, a sea of delicate blooms in shades of purple, pink, white, and yellow. Katherine had become such a renowned gardener that the Territorial Agricultural Society asked her to write articles about her methods, which were published and distributed to farmers throughout the Southwest. Benjamin remained her partner in all things, helping maintain the garden even as he ran the ranch and horse business. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1889, he surprised her by building a proper conservatory attached to the house, a beautiful structure with glass walls and roof, where she could grow even more delicate plants year-round. Katherine cried happy tears when she saw it, and christened it immediately by planting cutting from all her favorite flowers. The ranch became a gathering place for the community. Katherine's generous nature meant there was always room at the table for one more, and the Vance home became known for its hospitality. They hosted harvest celebrations in the garden, church socials on their lawn, and impromptu gatherings of neighbors who would stop by and stay for hours, talking and laughing amid the flowers. In 1896, Samuel left home at 16 to attend agricultural school in California, wanting to learn more advanced farming techniques. Katherine cried when they put him on the train, even though she was proud of his ambition. Benjamin held her close and reminded her that they had raised their son to be independent and curious, and this was the result of good parenting, not a loss. Samuel wrote long letters home about everything he was learning, and Katherine read them aloud to the family at dinner, proud of her son's accomplishments. Rose proved to have her mother's gift for plants and began helping Katherine run the garden business when she turned 14. Together, they developed new varieties and expanded into selling not just fresh flowers, but also dried arrangements and seeds by mail order. The business grew beyond anything Katherine had imagined, providing a significant income that allowed them to make even more improvements to the ranch. The twins, Thomas and James, took after their father and were happiest working with the horses. They learned everything Benjamin could teach them about training and breeding, and by the time they were 15, they were valuable partners in that side of the business. Margaret, the baby, surprised everyone by showing an aptitude for bookkeeping and business management, taking over the ranch accounts when she was just 12, and proving to have a head for numbers that far exceeded either parent's abilities. As the new century approached, Benjamin and Katherine found themselves in their 40s with grown or nearly grown children, a thriving business, and a reputation that extended far beyond their corner of Arizona. The territory was changing around them, becoming more settled and civilized, though it still retained much of its wild frontier character. On a warm evening in June of 1899, they sat together in the garden as they had countless times before. The columbines were in full bloom, more magnificent than ever after 21 years of careful cultivation. Samuel was home visiting from California, where he now worked as an agricultural consultant. Rose was inside with her young man, a rancher's son from a neighboring property who Benjamin approved of grudgingly and Katherine liked very much. The twins were in the barn working on a training problem with a difficult horse. Margaret was at a friend's house for supper, probably organizing something because that child could not help but take charge of everything she encountered. "We did good, Kate," Benjamin said, reaching over to take her hand. "Look at what we built. The ranch, the garden, our children. All of it started from that one terrible day when I found you holding a wilted flower." Katherine laced her fingers through his, marveling at how natural the gesture still felt after all these years. "You planted a garden that bloomed forever," she said softly. "Not just these flowers, but our whole life together. You took the worst day of my life and transformed it into the beginning of everything good." "We transformed it," he corrected, as he always did when she gave him too much credit. "I may have stopped that day, but you are the one who knew how to make things grow. You taught me everything important, Kate, how to nurture life instead of just surviving, how to build beauty in hard places, how to love completely and without reservation." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. The garden around them was alive with the buzzing of bees and the flutter of hummingbird wings. Somewhere in the distance, one of the twins called out to the other, their voices full of laughter. The smell of the flowers mixed with the scent of the earth and the promise of rain on the evening breeze. "You remember what you said to me on our wedding night?" Benjamin asked suddenly. "About partners in all things." "I remember," Katherine replied, smiling at the memory. "You said everything we have we made together." "I want to add something to that now," he said, turning to face her. "Everything we have, we made together, and everything we build in the future, we will build together too. You and me, Kate, always." "Always," she agreed, leaning in to kiss him as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. The years continued to unfold with their mix of joy and challenge, triumph and occasional sorrow. Samuel eventually returned to Arizona with a wife, and established his own ranch, putting his education to work developing drought-resistant crops. Rose married her young man in a ceremony in the garden, under an arch woven with columbines, and moved to a neighboring ranch where she continued her plant breeding work. The twins took over more of the horse business as Benjamin's knees began to protest the physical demands of training. Margaret went to school in San Francisco to study business, scandalizing some of the neighbors but making her parents fiercely proud. In 1905, Catherine's garden received official recognition from the United States Department of Agriculture for her development of several new columbine varieties that were particularly suited to desert growing conditions. The commendation came with a small monetary award and a certificate that Katherine framed and hung in the conservatory. Benjamin threw a celebration party that brought together family and friends from throughout the territory, and Katherine gave a speech in which she credited her mother's determination and her husband's faith for everything she had accomplished. Grandchildren began arriving in due course, filling the ranch with noise and laughter, and the kind of joyful chaos that only small children can create. Benjamin proved to be a doting grandfather, patient with the little ones in a way that surprised no one who knew how gentle he was with horses. Katherine loved having her grandchildren in the garden, teaching them the names of plants and how to tend growing things, passing on knowledge that had been passed to her. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1909, Benjamin and Katherine stood in the garden they had created together, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, and renewed their vows. It was a simple ceremony, just a reaffirmation of promises they had never stopped keeping, but it felt important to mark the milestone. 3 decades of marriage, of partnership, of love that had grown stronger with each passing year. "I found you holding a wilted flower," Benjamin said as part of his vows, his voice strong despite the silver in his hair and the lines on his face. "And I had no idea that I was finding the missing piece of my soul. Thank you, Kate, for 30 years of teaching me how to make beautiful things grow." Katherine, her own hair now streaked with gray but her eyes still as green and vibrant as they had been at 20, smiled through happy tears. "You planted a garden that bloomed forever," she replied, completing the refrain that had become a touchstone of their relationship. "But more than that, you planted love and hope and family. You gave me a life worth living when I thought everything worth having was gone. Thank you, Benjamin, for being my partner in all things." They kissed while their family cheered and the garden bloomed around them, a living testament to what could grow from the ashes of tragedy when tended with love and patience. The years of their middle age were peaceful and productive. The ranch continued to thrive under the management of the twins, who had inherited their father's way with horses and developed their own reputation for quality. Rose's plant breeding business became renowned throughout the Southwest, and she maintained a close partnership with her mother, the two women working together to develop new varieties and share knowledge. Samuel's ranch became one of the most successful in the territory, known for innovative irrigation techniques that made farming viable in marginal lands. Margaret returned from San Francisco with a degree and a head full of business ideas, helping the family expand their operations into new markets. Benjamin's health remained good well into his 60s, though he gradually turned over the more physically demanding work to his sons. He never stopped working with horses entirely, however, always having at least one young animal he was training. Katherine likewise never stopped gardening, finding peace and purpose in the daily rituals of tending her plants. The garden had become truly spectacular over the decades, drawing visitors from all over the territory and even from other states. In 1918, They celebrated their 40th anniversary with a massive gathering that included 4 children, 11 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild, Samuel's first grandchild who had arrived just months before. The party filled the garden and spilled out into the yard, with tables laden with food and a band playing music for dancing. Katherine, now 60 years old, danced with Benjamin under the stars as they had on their wedding night, moving a bit slower but with no less love in their embrace. 40 years, Benjamin marveled, holding her close. It seems like yesterday and forever ago at the same time. I know what you mean, Katherine replied, resting her head on his shoulder. Sometimes I still see that young man on horseback, stopping to help a broken woman in the desert. And sometimes I look at you and see every year we have shared written on your dear face. Do you have any regrets? He asked, a question he had never posed before. Katherine pulled back to look at him, surprised. Regrets? Benjamin Vance, how could I possibly regret a single moment of the life we have built together? My only regret is that my parents and brother did not live to see what came from their sacrifice, did not get to know the family we created and the beauty we grew from that terrible day. I think they know, Benjamin said softly. Somewhere, somehow, I think they know and they are proud of you. Of us, Katherine corrected, as she always did. Everything good in my life is because you stopped that day, because you saw someone in need and chose to help, because you planted a garden that bloomed forever. They swayed together to the music, surrounded by the evidence of their love. Children and grandchildren, a thriving ranch, and a garden that had become legendary. The columbines that had started from a single wilted flower now numbered in the thousands, their descendants spreading across the property and into gardens throughout Arizona and beyond, as Katherine shared seeds generously with anyone who asked. The last decades of their lives were gentle ones, filled with the satisfaction of work well done and love well kept. They watched their grandchildren grow and begin families of their own. They saw the territory become a state in 1912, witnessing the transformation of the wild frontier they had known into something more settled and civilized. They adapted to changes like the arrival of automobiles and telephones, though they never quite trusted the newfangled devices the way the younger generation did. Benjamin's health began to decline in his early 70s, his heart growing weaker despite his determination to keep working. Katherine nursed him with the same devotion she had given to her plants, and he bore his increasing limitations with patience and good humor, joking that he had earned a rest after so many years of hard work. On a spring morning in 1925, Benjamin Vance passed away peacefully in his sleep with Katherine beside him, 46 years after he had stopped to help a desperate young woman holding a wilted flower. He was 73 years old and had lived to see his garden bloom into something more magnificent than he could ever have imagined. Katherine grieved deeply for the loss of her partner, her love, her best friend. But she did not shatter the way she had when she lost her first family, because Benjamin had taught her that love does not end with death. It continues in the lives that were touched, in the family that was built, in the beauty that was created together. She continued to tend the garden, finding comfort in the familiar work and in the evidence of their life together that bloomed all around her. She lived another 12 years, staying active and engaged until the very end. She taught her great-grandchildren the secrets of the garden, passing on knowledge and love to yet another generation. She expanded the columbine varieties even further, her last major creation being a stunning purple and white variety she named Benjamin's Pride in honor of her late husband. Katherine Torres Vance died peacefully in 1937 at the age of 79, in the garden she had created, with soil under her fingernails and a columbine bloom in her hands. Her children buried her beside Benjamin under a grove of cottonwood trees they had planted together decades before, and placed seeds from every variety of flower in the garden into her coffin, so that beauty would bloom even in death. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through the generations, and the garden continued to flourish. The columbines that had started from a single wilted flower on the worst day of Catherine's life continued to spread and multiply, blooming year after year, a living monument to love that had transformed tragedy into beauty, death into life, and despair into hope. The story of the Vance family became part of local legend. The cowboy who stopped to help a grieving woman, the garden they planted together, and the love that had bloomed from ashes. Parents told the story to children, who told it to their children in turn, and the garden remained forever blooming, a testament to the truth that even in the hardest soil and most desperate circumstances, love can take root and flourish if tended with patience, faith, and devotion. And somewhere in the endless desert sky, two souls danced together among the stars, their love eternal as the garden they had planted, blooming forever.